like we always say, to wake up without an alarm clock, that is like being a billionaire to me.
Hey everybody, Mark too from Not Your Dad's CPA, and I've been on a lot of different podcasts and YouTube channels where I've been hosted, but this is really the first time where I have hosted someone on my YouTube channel. And I often get asked how I got started in this niche, in this community, and I usually just say, when I introduce myself, I say that I am a CPA and I help resellers with their taxes and their accounting, and that's what I specialize in. But I never really dive into how I ended up in that space. And today, I brought somebody on my channel who I give most of the credit to for me, the result of which me being in this space. So in 2014, 2015, I was a senior financial analyst living in Michigan, working for a big company. And I felt fortunate. I was out there with my family and had a lot of friends who were in a similar time of life. But there was something that I felt like was missing. I wanted to do something else. And it was at that time where I started blogging in the personal finance space. I've always been interested in personal finance, and I would read these blogs and I thought, I could do this. I think this is something I'd be interested in. So I got really involved in the personal finance community and got to know a lot of the popular personal finance bloggers. And at the same time, I decided, you know what, I'm a CPA. Why don't I just try to do the tax thing, make a little bit of extra money, even though I never really wanted to end up doing taxes. I always thought that was kind of lame, but I was like, you know what, let me just try it. So it was about that time when I met my guest, who I have on the podcast today, or who I have on my channel rather today, Jay. So let me bring him on and let you just introduce yourself, Jay, and give a little background.
Yeah, my name is Jay Dedman, and I guess people might know me online from, we did a podcast on scavengerlife.com for many years. Yeah, I had no idea that we were your first place to kind of open up your new career of accounting for online sellers. I just know back then, I think you said 2013, 2014, as someone that ran a podcast, we would always get people asking us around tax time, how do I do my taxes? I'm sure it still happens now. People start selling online. They're making all this funny money. It just seems like it's all free. And then suddenly they start realizing they're getting 1099s from eBay and PayPal and wherever else. And they're like, oh no, I have to pay taxes on this. So yeah, that's why we reach out to you, because I think you were in the personal finance space at that time.
Yeah, so we had a mutual acquaintance, and I had done taxes just for like a year or so. I mean, on my own. I had done it before, but this is the first time on my own. And I was also in that personal finance space, and you had asked somebody, hey, who's somebody we can reach out to for some tax help? And that's how we got connected. And you ultimately sent me an email and you said, hey, would you be interested in coming on our podcast? We've got this eBay podcast with about 10,000 listeners. And this is like early 2016.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had sold like one or two things on eBay just randomly, maybe in the past few years, but I was like, I didn't even know eBay was really still a thing in 2016. And then I started looking into it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a whole community.
It's a real thing. Yeah, like you can actually sell a lot of stuff on eBay. And back then too, I don't know about now, Amazon was like starting to explode, But yeah, I remember, if you go back and you hear that interview I did with you, I remember you were sometimes very like cautious. You were like, I don't actually know. How do you do cost of goods sold, and how do you, it was definitely a brave new world, And I know for me, we still actually have an accountant who is in our town, and he's an older guy. We've had to kind of teach him, and we do a lot of the stuff ourselves, and he kind of does the final bit. But it's a lot of traditional accountants just don't know how to deal with this kind of stuff.
And you just said something. You just said something that I hear a lot. You're like, we feel like we have to teach him.
Yeah.
And sometimes that works. Like, I'm sure you've taught him a lot and he probably gets it now. But a lot of times people come to me and they're like, I felt like I was teaching him more than he was teaching us. So then they end up just coming with me, someone who's more familiar with it.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're right. I probably was more cautious on that podcast because a lot of that stuff was new to me, at least as far as the different, the
Yeah,
main
I mean,
questions people had.
you were being very good and professional, not wanting to give like a simple answer to something that might have not been simple or you weren't sure of, and that's the way it should be. You know, I mean,
And do you remember the main question you had asked me? You're like, here's one like debate we're having right now on our forum. Is that something you feel like you could tackle? What was that?
do you know the answer? I
I
don't
don't know
know.
the answer.
Okay, tell me what is it?
I mean, you already mentioned it.
The COGS, the cost
Cost
of
of
goods
goods
sold.
sold.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's always the question. Can I just write it all off the minute I buy it? Versus
Yes. So there was this debate going on, and I went and looked at it. I was like, oh, I don't know. I got to look at this. Because there was this rule back then where if your gross receipts were less than $1 million, people were interpreting something on the IRS website to mean that they could just deduct it immediately.
Yep.
But it really had to do with something called incidental materials and supplies. I think I said that right. So I at that point I really dove deep into all that stuff and feel like I got a pretty good handle on it. And it hasn't stayed the same over the years. It's actually evolved and changed a couple of times, and it's just, yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah.
It's so complex. And I posted a YouTube video about a year ago now where I really dived into the detail and put it all out there as far as where we've been and where we're at now to give people more.
I mean, it's fascinating how much things have changed even in the 7 years since we last talked. I mean, now, you know, the federal government passed that law that now taxes have to get done on all online sales. So that's a done deal. I mean, that's a big one. And then now the government's going after all these little payment sites to make sure they're giving out 1099s. And I know there's sellers who chase the ways to get paid without getting the 1099. They're just so against paying any kind of taxes. They would rather shrink their business than pay taxes. God forbid. You know. So.
Yeah, so I kind of want to dive into your story and how you guys got into it, and you know, how you got into the podcast.
I can give you just a quick overview. Yeah, I mean, of our little story. I mean, you know,
Yeah,
it was,
and just real
yeah.
quick. So I mean, every once in a while, I mean, I always remember you guys. So Jay and
Ryan.
Ryan and Ryanne.
It said like the boy's name, Ryan.
Okay, yeah. So you guys, I mean, you're like a duo. You're a pair. You did the podcast together.
That's right.
And yeah, I mean, I often think about you guys, but we hadn't really connected in several years. And then just the other day, I looked up your podcast and I saw that you did your final podcast about a year ago. And I listened to it and I was just feeling all nostalgic. And I was like, man, I got to get him on here so I can, you know, tell my story, tell his story, give him credit for where I am today in my space. Because after I was on your podcast, you know, I had a few people email me, ended up doing taxes for them. And some of those people were online content creators, and that just generated more. And after a while, I just said, you know what? I think I just want to niche down on this space, and it's been awesome.
It is. It's so exciting to hear that. And if we had anything to do with that, we're so proud of you for doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you guys had your podcast for, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years.
Yeah. So yeah, we started selling back in 2008. Which still seemed pretty early, although there are people who are hearing this will say they started selling 1999. So, but you know, back then there wasn't a lot of online content around this stuff. Like there was just eBay community forums, which were like a really dark place of negativity. And so we really didn't go there very much. And we just kind of learned how to do our eBay store ourselves, just trial and error. And this was back in the, I don't know, there have been so many economic downturns, but the big one in 2008, it was just a way for us to make some extra cash because, yeah, we were a bit afraid about everything, you know, it was scary, you know. And then, you know, we started to realize, well, we can make $100 a week. And then if we put more and more time into it, we can make $300 a week. And then suddenly we're paying all of our bills. And we just saw that the more work we put into it, the more money we could make out of it. We decided in 2013 to start a podcast with some friends because it's a lonely world, right? Being at home and doing all this stuff by yourself, and you want to connect with people. And there weren't any places we saw where people were really talking about this in just kind of in a non-dramatic way, just kind of let's just talk about the practical aspects of day-to-day selling online. And that's what we started to do. And so yeah, from 2013 to just last year, almost 2023, we had the podcast, and we did it every week. A couple weeks we missed, but it was just audio, although you can still go online and hear them and watch them.
And there were no other podcasts or YouTube channels at that time that you remember?
Uh, you know what? There probably were. I don't
Or just
really
that you remember?
Yeah, I don't really remember them. I don't remember the names of them. I remember some faces, but we wanted to be consistent too. I think something we were trying to do was do it every week. We would put it out every Sunday, and we would also include our numbers. That was a big thing too. We wanted to show people how much we were making every week and how much it cost us to make that. Because there were, and it's still true today, right? People make these videos where they say, I just went to the thrift store and I made $5,000. And what they really mean is they purchase items that they think in some future world might sell for $5,000 if everything goes right. And that's a different equation. And we were trying to kind of bring it down to more of a practical, this is what we can expect.
Yeah, and that was probably pretty weird back then in 2008, 2013 still. I mean, I feel like post-COVID, maybe it's a little bit different, but people still look at a lot of my clients or a lot of people who sell online as like, okay, that's nice, but when are you going to get a real job?
Yeah. I mean, look, our families, especially in the early days, our families thought we were crazy, they would laugh at us, when we would go to family events. I mean, we didn't care because we were making real money and paying our bills. For us, it felt so luxurious because we had purchased our time, we no longer had to work for other people. And that just felt so good to, like we always say, to wake up without an alarm clock. That is like being a billionaire to me, and to this day, it's stayed true. I mean, we wake up pretty early anyway, but I don't have to wake up at a certain time, get on the road, fight traffic, get somewhere,
Totally. And was selling online your first experience with self-employment?
So we had quit our jobs a couple of years earlier. I mean, our career jobs, we produce media. So we had worked at TV stations. For a couple of years, we were working freelance. So we had worked for ourselves, 1099 employees, but it was different. And it was different in the sense of, most people, us included, we were W-2 employees, right? You work, they take money out, you get like a 1040 EZ form, and taxes are easy. You take the standard deduction. As 1099 employees, we could deduct maybe travel or if we bought some equipment, but really we'd often just take the standard deduction. When we started selling on eBay, it was a whole different, it was very overwhelming. I think everyone has that first year where you're like, oh no, how do I do this? eBay is saying, I made $100,000, but really 20,000 of that is shipping that I spent, and what about all of my cost of goods sold and shipping supplies and all my travel in the car to drive places? I mean, I didn't keep track of any of that stuff. We had that first year, and then we had to create a system.
And that's pretty common, I think. And I was curious about your experience with that, because it's not uncommon for a lot of people to ask, oh shoot, I did make $100,000. Do I have to pay tax on that whole thing? Like they might not even know what a deduction is.
Or,
the distinction between profit and total revenue.
Right.
So was that basically your first, so if you were doing freelance before, you probably had some exposure to self-employment tax then.
A little bit, but not, it's really deductions. it's all about deductions, you know, and that's something we had not had real experience with, you know. And, you know, yeah, and like you said, the fact that we have to, you know, when you have an employer, they're paying half of your Social Security and Medicare, and now when you're self-employed, you have to carry that whole weight yourself, and it's a lot of money, you know, and you're like, I can't believe I have to pay all this money, you know. But that's how the government works. That's how society works, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It can seem like a big chunk of tax. So you've got your regular income tax, and you have self-employment tax on top of that.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes people will tell me like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I would owe so much. I'm thinking maybe I should just quit because of how much tax I'm having
Right.
to pay.
Well, I think people don't realize how much taxes we pay when we're W-2 employees. It's just
That's
that
a good
it's
point.
automatically taken out. I don't see it. You know, it's on my check, and, you know, I might complain about it, but I don't really think about it. And, you know, oftentimes I get money back at the end of the year, so it feels like free money. And when you work for yourself, no taxes are taken out automatically. I mean, it's good to pay your quarterly taxes if you want to be smart, but ultimately you don't have to. And then at the end of the year, yeah, you got to pay that big bill, you know.
It can be really painful. Like for me, a big chunk of my earnings I make during tax season. So that's first quarter basically. So when I have to go pay my estimated taxes for that quarter, like
Wow.
it's painful.
Yeah. But, you know,
But it's
mm,
still worth it.
yeah, I
You know,
mean,
I still have money left over.
yeah, I mean, I always tell people, like, if I have a big tax bill, it's because I've made a lot of money, you know, and you just have to plan for it and work it into your life. I guess the problem is that people just see all that money as free money, and they're just spending it all, even if they're being smart about it, investing back into their business. They still have to ultimately pay a lot of taxes on it, and I guess that's just where people get they aren't incorporating it into their financial system.
Yeah. One thing that resonated with me as I listened to your last podcast was, I mean, it seems like you've gone through different phases throughout your journey or your reselling journey. You know, you started selling on eBay for one reason, and then you got into the podcast. You started helping other people. Um, you know, I don't know if the type of items that you sold evolved over time. And then I think at different points you started working toward new goals. Like I know you guys do like rentals, and then you're doing something else now. So I had this idea, like, you know, it sounds kind of like the typical business life cycle that you learn about in a business class, where it kind of goes up and then you know, just evolves. And I
Yeah,
was like, that's really cool. Like everybody's reselling for some different ultimate purpose.
yeah,
And one thing you said was like, you know, we're not all about the hustle. We're not just all about selling more and more and more and more. And like,
yeah,
you know, you had like some pretty specific goals in mind, and now you're doing something. You still resell, but you have another focus right now, which I think we'll talk about later. And I
yeah.
was just like, that's really cool.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, ultimately, like, we're artists first. Like, Ryan, my wife, went to art school. I mean, I was an English major. We didn't learn business. We've just kind of learned it ourselves. We're also into like punk rock music, so it's all about DIY, you know. And our goals have never been about being rich. Like, to me, that's not a goal. Like being famous, like those aren't really goals. Those are just like feelings. And so for us, the goal is just like, we want to own our time, you know. We want to not have to go to work, you know. We want to pay our monthly bills, and then we would just set new goals after that. And for us too, having experienced 2008 when it was really scary, we were afraid of making eBay our only way of making money, because, you know, that's just one point of failure. So yeah, back in 2009, we bought a old house that we fixed up and turned into a vacation rental. We bought several of those over the years, and you know, to try and have different streams of income, which I think people get now. You know, it's good to do that. But you know, it's all just through. I think for us, the podcast, we never made money really on our podcast. It was more about fun, just connecting with other people, and it was exciting talking to other people who had those same kind of goals. Like, not about getting rich, just about having their time. It's all about time to spend with their family or to spend with their kids, you know, to travel. Some people were older, they wanted to take care of their parents that had gotten old, or maybe they had a spouse that was sick, you know. That was exciting to me, you know, to us, to hear that people were getting their time back and could start to live their lives in a way that they wanted to, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys influenced and helped a lot of people because, like you said, there were tons of people in your same boat with not a lot of resources, not a lot of people to learn things
Yeah.
from. And yeah, I have met, I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds of clients, and beyond that, just other people that I've interacted with who sell stuff online, and they're in all those kind of situations you mentioned. Like,
Right.
maybe they're retired and they're doing it to stay busy, or maybe they're doing it to help put their kids through college or whatever.
Yeah. Or social, or they didn't save enough at the end of their lives, and so they need to supplement their income because they don't have enough money.
Yeah. And what types of things did you guys target? Like, what did you look for? What did you sell?
Yeah. So, you know, over at Scavenger Life, we would call ourselves trash elves because we were all about like selling anything. I mean, that's the exciting thing, is that there's so much waste and abundance in this country that there's just piles of stuff everywhere that seemingly nobody wants. And so if you're willing to sell anything, there's so much inventory out there. So we actually built like a small warehouse behind our house, and we just would buy and find for free everything. Just little doodads and antique items and vintage and clothes. And for us, that was how we like to run our business. Low cost, you know. I don't want to pay much for my inventory, but I'm willing to sit on it and wait for someone to buy it, you know. Yeah, so like right now we have our inventory is like 9,000 items on our eBay store, and stuff sells slow. I mean, we have items in our store that might take 5 years, 6 years, 7 years to sell.
Mm.
Um, but because the cost to keep it online is negligible, it's okay. I'll wait that long because it didn't cost me anything to purchase it. You know?
So you just answered one of my questions. I was going to ask you if you guys are still actively selling, and with 9,000 items in your store, I guess that means yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not our full-time gig these days, but we built, like we call it a pipeline. You know, we built a whole pipeline where we put these items we find and we put them in there, and then we wait and money comes out the other side. And like, why cut that pipeline off? You know, we've hired, like, over the years, we've had, you know, kids of friends of ours will hire to take pictures and help us put things online. You know, it still takes work for sure, but it's like a side job that we do.
Yeah. And you said something that just, I like the way you phrase it. You said we have so much waste and abundance in this country. And it's funny you said that, because yesterday my wife went to Goodwill for the first time in forever, she says, because she took my daughter to buy a dress for a dress up thing at school. But she just said, man, we have so much waste and stuff. And I guess, you know, that I guess that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's an opportunity.
Yeah,
But
we're all blessed, right? I mean, this country is blessed with having wealth and stuff, although there's lots of inequalities that are growing in this country. But you know, at this moment, there's still a lot of stuff. Although I have seen from 2008 to now, there's more competition there, and I think it's ultimately a good thing. More people are aware of the value of the things that they are throwing away, and maybe more people are willing to sell the stuff they have, or they themselves go out and find stuff and resell, and people see the value of buying secondhand. I think it's a great thing. I mean, it makes it a little more difficult finding cheap items, but for the benefit of the culture, I think it's a good thing.
so say I'm an 18-year-old college student with some extra time, or a stay-at-home parent, or just somebody who wants to make a little bit of extra money, and I don't currently have any type of side income. Is it too late in 2023 to jump onto eBay or jump into any type of online reselling? Your perspective.
Yeah, I don't think it's too late. It's just going to be different. And I think you have to be creative and willing to find the things that people overlook. You know, it's about arbitrage, right? You know, I think that's the pitfall I see people do, is that they go online and they watch the videos of the influencers showing you how to sell video games or clothes. And then people are like, I want to sell exactly that thing that millions of other people are watching and doing the same thing. And then it's a downward spiral because you're paying too much for stuff and competing against too many people. So the thing is about being creative, you know, finding the things that people don't want, but that there's a value for to certain collectors.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. So you mentioned your systems, like you have a pretty good pipeline, a good system in place.
Right.
How has that system changed over the years, or how often has it changed, or how long did it take you to get it to a place where you feel like, you know what, I feel like this is good, or is it always changing?
I mean, I would like to say for certain, just so it's clear, we are not the experts, and the way we do it might not be the best way. We've just found a system that works for us, and we're probably doing the same thing we've been doing for a decade now. You know, we where we find and buy things, they come in. We have the same way of photographing them. We put them up. It's really about the unglamorous work of listing items. Like there's no secret here. There's no mystery to it. No one can give you a shortcut. It's about putting the time in, photographing it, and listing it on eBay or Amazon or wherever else. And I think that's where people really get caught up. They get excited about finding stuff. They love to buy stuff because that's a fun treasure hunt part of it, but they hate the grind, you know, of sitting there and listing it. And it doesn't seem fun, but that's what you have to do.
And do you guys still do most of your listing, or do you have like contractors who help you with that?
Yeah, we just have like the different people we have take pictures for us. I mean, we only have one person at a time. We don't have a lot of employees. It's mainly like high school students who are just trying to find after school gigs. They take photos and we teach them how to write a title the best that they can. And then normally we have to spruce it up because, you know, a teenager, when you hand them some weird vintage item, they don't have the cultural sophistication to know how to title those kind of items.
Mm-hmm.
So we just tell them to do the best they can, and then we have to spruce it up. But them doing that much work really moves the process along.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So are there any lessons learned, you feel like, when you reflect back over the years that sort of stand out?
You know, I think like as far as accounting goes, you know, especially I wish that we had accounting systems earlier, but we couldn't have known. And I wish that there were, it seems even now, I could be wrong, that no one's really, like no technology company has really solved it for online sellers. There's no real system you can go to and it does it for you or helps you along the process. Like these days we do QuickBooks just because we now have that for our other businesses, our rentals, and now we have a coffee shop. But it works pretty well for eBay, but it's not perfect. You know, again, I feel like we're teaching QuickBooks how it works, you know.
Yeah, right. And you just said, as far as your system, your pipeline, it's what works for you. It's not going to work for everybody.
Right.
And that's exactly the same thing I tell people about bookkeeping.
Yeah.
I say it depends on how many different platforms you sell on. It depends on if you value simplicity or if you want something more robust.
Right.
So yeah, there's no one size fits all for that.
Yeah. I mean, our accountant, you know, a very older gentleman who's had lots of years dealing with the IRS, he just says, as long as you have a system where you can show the IRS that you've done your best due diligence to try and keep track of this, not that that's foolproof, but that's what they're trying to find, and that's what we've done.
Yeah, that's kind of what I tell people too. There's not a lot to worry about if you're doing your best. At the end of the day, if you do get audited, which is extremely unlikely, but if you did, they're only going to look at a tiny piece, and the person who's looking at that probably just wants to get their job done. They just want you to flash some piece of paper at them so they can say, boom, okay, you're good.
Yeah, and and just for anyone that is hearing this, I know, I mean, I guess the IRS has that scary reputation for a reason, to scare people into making sure they're paying their taxes. So, but we've never been fully audited. We've just had a letter here and there that we get sent where somebody has a question, and our accountant, because we like to have an accountant between us and the IRS, will then send them a response, or there was a mistake made or misunderstanding, and we write a check for that, and then it's good.
Yeah, it typically it is just some type of misunderstanding, or in my experience, usually the IRS just doesn't have all the information they need.
Right.
And honestly, I try and avoid dealing with the IRS as much as possible, just because it takes so much time.
Yeah.
But what I will do is I'll say, look, here's what they're missing. We need to file this form, and I'll help file the form, or give the client or the person the information they need to go back and say, here's what it is, and then it resolves itself usually.
Right. And again, I just say, I mean, and this is probably more of a political thing, but people get very mad about taxes, and I get it. I don't like to write those big checks either, because it's a lot of money. But the taxes are the things that pay our schools and our roads, and when we get older, our Social Security and Medicare, which protects our country. So that's what I try and think about. It pays for the library. So every time I write that check, I try and think of the things that I love about our society, and think like, this is what I'm helping pay for.
Yeah, it's a good tactic.
So I would rather think of it like that than just to be always angry and why is this happening to me? So.
Yeah. You guys on your podcast, you were sort of reflecting back about some funny things that had happened. Like you told a story about a group of, I don't know, college girls or something who showed up to buy a table or something, but they had a really small car and it obviously wasn't going to fit. So it's just sort of, and you're like, oh, to be a new reseller again type of thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of just those little details that people miss. Like when you go to an auction or something, and if you buy too much, how are you going to take it all home? And, people get very caught up in the moment. Yeah. You're talking about a moment we had two young girls come to buy a table for their new apartment, but they came in like a 4-door Honda Accord, and we live in a rural area. They had driven an hour and a half away, and I had to just like figure out how to strap on this table on their roof and hope that they get home okay. But that's some of the adventures of scavenging, right? Of going out and finding stuff. I mean, I think that's what excites us all, is that it is a treasure hunt.
Yeah, and that's something that is not necessarily part of my personality. So I find it fascinating that there are just thousands, probably millions of people, like most of my clients. I'm usually skeptical, and I'll ask them sometimes, like, do you actually enjoy that? And they're like, oh yeah, it's like exciting.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and that's what I guess is the engine that runs all of this, is people love to scavenge, but we do see a lot of people who are like casualties of this, where they quickly turn from scavengers into hoarders because they don't do the second part, and that's listing. And their house just becomes full of all the things they're finding, and they think it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's worth zero until you list it online.
So do you guys have a death pile, or if not, how have you avoided that?
Yeah. So for many years, for probably the first 10 years, we had everything just in our home. Our home was our eBay business. You would see behind me just piles of stuff. And we would call them death piles, because they were just these emotionally draining piles of items that we thought were valuable, but we didn't like it enough to list it. And they would just sit there looking at us. We then built a warehouse so we could organize, and we have a system now. And now we don't really have death piles because we have a good, clear pipeline. You know, we have unlisted items. We have a helper. She comes every weekend and she takes care of a little bit of it. And so, yeah, the a system will always take care of those piles of items.
That's probably a really helpful piece of information, or a better way of thinking about that for a lot of people who will listen to this, because I hear about the death pile so often, but you just like, no, it's an unlisted,
That's right.
group of items that is scheduled to be listed next Tuesday or whatever.
There's a plan for it, right? Yeah, I think that's a thing. Now, you know, so we were always focused on eBay. We fooled around with Amazon for a year or so, but then got frustrated, and the kind of scavenging we were doing just didn't really work well for Amazon because we were always finding used items. Are you finding that people are still selling heavily on Amazon, where they're having things made in China, or, you know, yeah, period question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I should do some type of analysis on that. Probably, I would say, and this is just estimating, but I'd say at least probably over half of my clients are eBay focused, even though many of them probably also sell on other platforms as well. Poshmark, Kari, whatnot is becoming popular these days. But I do have a lot of clients who sell on Amazon as well, but I don't necessarily know whether they're doing like label or what.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. There was a real like a real just surge of excitement over Amazon, and people online were really bragging about making just ungodly sums of money because you could sell so much stuff, and seems exciting for people because they could buy new from a warehouse, have it sent from the warehouse to Amazon. They didn't have to touch it, and then things would sell, and they would just collect the cash. To me, it sounded too good to be true, but I don't know. I guess some people figured it out.
Yeah,
We're definitely
think
more of the hands-on. Yeah.
I think some people are very successful. I mean, I see everything. I see people with some significant losses, some people with some pretty significant profits, a lot of people in the middle.
Yeah.
Probably around that time. So I mean, I'm kind of phasing out. My business is sort of limping along, but I actually do private label through Amazon FBA as well, and have been doing that since probably not too long after the first time we talked.
Okay. And has it stayed steady, or is it up and down, or is it?
So I sell like outdoor hiking and camping utensil type stuff. So it really blew up during COVID. It like doubled, tripled in sales, and now it's kind of come back down. I mean, it's been profitable, but I haven't really put any time into it because I've been just doing all this CPA stuff.
I mean, and I guess what always worried me about that is it seemed a big upfront cost, because, you know, you have to buy pallets of items and then pay to have it shipped. And then I would always hear kind of horror stories of Amazon could turn your store off, or that category. I mean,
yeah, that's another thing to think about. They can, I do have people tell me I got suspended this year, so I'm doing something else, or
or it's so easy, other people are coming up behind you selling the same camping thing.
Yeah, or they'll drop ship your stuff through eBay, and that's happened to me before.
Really? Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So those were fascinating things. So I guess who we represented was more just kind of, I feel like we're just part of a long line of just old school kind of digging in the dumps for the items no one wants. And then instead of going and selling in like a flea market or in like a parking lot on a Saturday, we just do it online. And we've just kind of continued on that kind of old school way of selling items.
So do you, if you could go back and do it over again, are there any, I'm sure there are lots of things you would do differently, but are there any significant ones that stand out to you? Like, would you have started with a better system, or better bookkeeping, or I don't know, sold different things?
Absolutely. I think we were selling we sold items that, you know, we were getting clothes for cheap, and we were selling clothes with like holes in it and stains. And I don't know. We only sell things that are in very good condition these days. We also were selling things really cheap. I think there was a year or two where we were selling things way underpriced. Like we thought because we were buying things for so cheap, we had no right to try and sell them for more money. And then we realized, oh, there's just a market price. It doesn't matter how cheap I got it for. I should sell it for what the market will bear. And that's the correct way to do it. So we learned about that too. And eBay is great for that. You can type in and do research and see exactly what people sell. It's so interesting now. I think it was about when we started talking, when it became more common to go into a Goodwill or go to a flea market and you just see people on their phones. They're just walking around doing research on their phones right there. I remember that moment seeing that and being like, oh, everyone's doing this now. Like this is becoming much more common. And that's a good way to buy.
And so many people are doing that. And yet if you haven't done it, or if you're not aware of it, you're just going to think they're texting their mom or something.
Yeah, that's right. But, we see now, you'll go to a yard sale and they'll have a table of their good items and they'll print out a listing from eBay showing how much someone has put this item up for on eBay. Not for how much it's sold, but for how much someone wants for it. And they're pricing it based on an eBay price because they're understanding that eBay sellers are coming and buying from them. So it's an interesting feedback loop that's happening these days.
That's the first time I've heard that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's very frustrating because it's hard to explain to someone like you're never going to get that price, and why would I buy it for that price and then try and But it's just interesting. That's a free market, right?
So, do you ever see yourself closing the eBay store?
I mean, we still love to scavenge. I mean, it's still so much fun. And we still have, we're in a rural part of America in Virginia, and there's still so much cool stuff. And I think if there's no longer the abundance and the waste and we can't get things for relatively cheap, I think would be when we would stop. But I think America would have to go into a pretty big downturn for that to happen.
One thing I've actually polled my audience. I've done surveys a couple of times, just asking them like, why do you do this? Why do you do what you do? What's your ultimate goal? What's your why? Right. And the responses are actually, they're inspiring because just seeing what people are working toward and the situations that they're in, they enjoy reselling. Like you're still reselling because it's fun, but at the same time, it's also a means to an end.
Absolutely.
So right now you're doing the coffee shop, which I think is really cool because you've used the reselling partially to propel you into this new thing you're excited about. So at what point did you decide you wanted to do that?
I mean, I think it was always kind of part of the plan. I mean, it wasn't a master plan from the get-go, but we knew eBay was not going to be our grind for the rest of our lives. And even though I think we'll keep selling on eBay for, I don't know, for the foreseeable future, it's not a grind anymore. It's a very small part of our time. But yeah, we use the money from eBay to then buy these rentals, and then that made us money. And then we use that money to, we now run a couple of coffee shops with a couple partners here in our small rural community. And that's exciting for us because we wanted to do something to help our area. Like we live in one of these little small towns, like a lot of places in America that are undervalued, overlooked, where the downtown's kind of empty. And we bought a building in our downtown and created a really cool place that people can now come to and gather, and we make money from it. So that's important too. But that's exciting. And we have a place where we can go to and meet people and not be just isolated in our home selling things online.
Yeah, that's so cool. I definitely wanted to highlight that just because. Yeah, the evolution in your reselling journey, and you're doing things that you enjoy, and it's also helping you to to invest in your own community and help other people. And that's really cool.
Yeah, and and that's a question I always ask people who sell online, like, what's the goal? Like, especially people who are making a lot of money. Some people do very well at this because they have a good eye or they have access to really incredible inventory, and if they're making 100K, $500,000 or something, like, what are you doing with that? Like, are you just buying like a fancy house or cars? Are you saving it? Like, what's the goal? Because money itself is just a tool, right? And so, what are you using that money for? Or that's an important question.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, if the goal is the fancy house, then great. But like,
Yeah.
like, are you aware of that? Like, I have a really young client. He wasn't even 18 yet before he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars selling stuff he was getting from China.
Wow.
And he emailed me and he's like, "Hey, if I buy a G-Wagon, is that deductible?" So I'm like, dude, if buying the G-Wagon is your goal, that's awesome. But maybe like take a step back and just think about like, what do I want to accomplish with this money?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where kind of our scavenging world and the personal finance world came together, was just about, being frugal, saving money, putting money into index funds. So you get money out and then you can retire early. Like, that's exciting to me. Like, I love Mr. Money Mustache and Jim Collins. I mean, I love that world, And I think we kind of both come from that world, right?
Yeah, and that's a good thing to highlight, because I try and help people with their tax preparation, with their business profitability. But and that's a good goal, but if you're profitable with your business, but then your personal finance side is all out of whack, then it sort of defeats the purpose. So that is something I think needs to be highlighted more.
Yeah, I mean, if your daily expenses are burning up all of your profits, I mean, then it's fine as long as you're making a lot of profits. But it's just, these days you just cannot guarantee you're always going to be making a lot of money. So I always make sure we're just stashing money away or investing it elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know. I think I've hit most of the questions I wanted to hit. Is there anything else any other words of wisdom you want to leave with the community in general?
Yeah, I just always let people know, just to, this is, again, not a secret society, or like there's no mystery to it. There's so much online to learn from, but just be careful about falling into traps, about finding people who are wanting to sell you things that are promising you riches. That's just not how it works. It really is just the day in and day out, just work. And it's just like anything else. But instead of doing work for other people, you're just working for yourself. But ultimately, it is work. There's no shortcuts.
Yeah, thanks. And your website is still live. You guys still have like a forum that...
Yep, scavengerlife.com. We still post every week. We no longer do a podcast. Maybe we'll come back someday. But for right now, we just post our numbers. And then we have a forum where there's a group of us that just kind of talk about the day's work. I mean, a week's work and things that happen.
Well, yeah.
Cool. It's great talking to you, Mark.
Yeah, it was awesome to catch up.
Congrats on all of your success. And I think you've probably helped a lot of people who are trying to find that accounting help, because I know that's a scary thing for brand new people.
Yeah, I mean, I think had we not done that podcast, I mean, maybe I would have ended up in this niche, but it would have been a few years. I honestly have no idea where I'd be.
Yeah.
But I ended up, not too long after I got into it, I wrote an ebook, and I was like, oh man, I just made $1,000. Like, there's something here. So then, I got a bunch of reselling tax clients. I do tax preparation. I created a tax course for resellers called Reseller Tax Academy. So that's been a source of income. So, this is what I do full time. And, with those earnings I've generated, I've been able to take my family to Mexico, to Costa Rica. We like to travel and see the world and stuff. So it's been it's been awesome. And I like to think that, well, I know that you were a part of that. So
well,
I appreciate it.
If anything, we just opened a window and you're the one that saw it and jumped in there. So
yeah, exactly.
So, okay. Well,
yeah, thanks again.
Yep. Thanks so much.
See you later.